Hi everyone, I'm Martin and welcome to another MH Runners Club coaching talk. Today I'm going to be talking about pre-race carb loading. Now, you need energy in order to run a marathon, and the majority of this will come from carbohydrates, either that you have stored or that you consume during your run. Now, thinking of your carbohydrate stores as a fuel tank will help you to ensure that you have enough energy to reach your potential on race day. Yet many runners still struggle with poor energy management during a race. There are two common mistakes that runners have fallen into at some point, and these are: number one, getting it wrong pre-race. This may be by underestimating their pre-race carbohydrate needs, or eating too much the night before the race, or including too much high fat or high fibre foods that can cause stomach issues during the race itself. And number two, under fueling during the race itself by not taking enough carbohydrates in during the run. Now, I'll come to this second point in the next coaching talk. This coaching talk focuses on filling your fuel tank before the marathon. Now, the need to ensure your glycogen stores are full prior to a key run or a race is a well accepted practice amongst marathon runners, but it's so easy to get wrong and risk not getting to the start line fueled sufficiently. The purpose of the carb load is to make sure that your glycogen stores are full at the start of the marathon. You store glycogen in your liver and your muscles, and you also have some sugars available in your blood as well. Now, when the blood sugar gets used up, the body breaks down the glycogen from the liver and the muscles to fuel the activity and to keep your blood sugars stable. You're constantly using and replacing stored glycogen, especially when you exercise and then refuel, but even also at rest overnight. Now, the science has evolved over the years. In the 1970s and 1980s, it was well believed that you could increase the amount of glycogen stored by doing a total depletion phase before carb loading. So this would mean going on a very hard run to use up all of your glycogen stores, and then you would follow that up with a low carbohydrate diet for 2 to 3 days at the start of the marathon week. The final 2 to 3 days before race day would be spent reloading all of the carbs with a very, very high carbohydrate diet. Now, this had the downside of lowering the runner's immunity in the early part of that last week, and also some felt ill, they felt fatigued, and they felt really run down. Now, research has since shown little benefit of depleting your carb stores before loading, so this method really is rarely used nowadays. Instead, carb loading for 2 to 3 days prior to your race without any depletion will convey as much benefit without the risks of lower immunity or fatigue. So to maximise your carb stores, it's recommended that you refuel really well after all training sessions in those final couple of weeks, including with enough carbohydrates. Your body will uptake and store more carbohydrates in the window straight after your run, so make sure that you refuel straight away. Practice carb loading the day before any long runs. Studies have shown that your body will adapt to regular carb loading practice by slightly increasing the amount that it can store each time. And then undertake a 2 to 3 day carb loading phase just before your race. So what is this 2 to 3 day carb load? Well, basically the carb load is simply a method of ensuring you taking enough carbohydrates to fill your stores. In the 3 days prior to the marathon, you want to be consuming sort of at least 70% of your calories coming from carbohydrates. Now, this sounds like fun, but in reality, it can actually be quite hard to achieve. So instead of increasing the percentage of carbohydrates doesn't necessarily mean dramatically increasing your calorie intake, but instead cutting down on fats and some of your proteins and eating more carbs instead. So instead of having loads more calories and loads more food, you just shift the balance more from proteins and fats to more carbohydrates. You'll also be tapering, so exercising less and using less glycogen, which will help you store more of it. Now, unfortunately, most of our favourite carb-based foods tend to come with fat, which can cause feelings of overfullness, meaning that you eat less carbs, or cause you an upset stomach maybe during a race. So plan your food wisely, okay, and choose well. You also want to try and avoid any high fibre options, okay? So particularly the day before the race, especially if you're prone to gastrointestinal issues, okay, or stomach distress. Too much fibre may result in diarrhea or cramping on race day. So look for options such as white bread, white rice, plain pasta, sports bars and sports drinks compared to the brown, more sort of fibrous and healthier options. Carb loading isn't necessarily healthy or classed as healthy. However, it has its sport specific reasons. You're not doing this all week, every week. It's just before a long run and big races. Now, increasing carb-rich drinks, such as your sports drinks and things like that, is a great way to meet your carb loading requirements. Not only will this increase your carbohydrate intake, but it will also help to fully hydrate you prior to race day. So you can include things like fruit juices, dilute them if you prefer, or sports drinks as your carb-rich drinks. Now, how much carbohydrate is enough? Okay. The general scientific guidelines for effective carb loading suggest consuming between 7 to 12 grams of carbs per 1 kilogram of body weight. By aiming for near the top end, even if you fall short, you should still be comfortably within that range. The key to successful carb loading is preparation. You need to look at the amount of carbohydrates in the portion size of the foods you are likely to eat. Then choose the foods with the highest amount of carbohydrates, as that means eating less volume of food overall, and then you will be feeling full with all of those carbs. Okay. I start to increase my carbohydrate intake from breakfast on Thursday morning when I'm running a Sunday marathon. I write a list of what I need in advance, do my shop and have it all ready to go. I then spread my food intake throughout the day. It's thought that most people can only absorb about 90 to 100 grams of carbs per hour, so don't leave it all until the last minute and in the evening and try and play catch up. This will probably mean that you won't consume enough, and it can also negatively impact your sleep if you're going to bed on an overly full stomach. Now, on the Saturday, you may want to finish eating slightly earlier, so having an earlier carb-rich evening meal and a sports drink later on, okay, so that you have the chance to digest the food before the marathon. A massive carb-rich meal on a Saturday night is very common. Loads of places will put on a pasta party the night before a marathon, but you risk this meal sitting heavy in your stomach for race day the next day. This increases, okay, the risk of having stomach issues during the race. By finishing the carb loading by sort of mid to late afternoon, so maybe have your big meal at sort of 4, 5, maybe 6 o'clock at the latest, your stomach should then be emptied the following morning. Now, I've attached the my carb loading menu, okay, to the video to give you an idea of what I consume in the days before a race of half marathon distance and above. This is by no means the only way to get carbs in, but this will give you some ideas of what I have, and then you can adjust it accordingly to your own tastes. Now, if you do weigh yourself regularly, don't be alarmed, okay, by a 2 to 4 pound increase in weight in the last day or so before race day. This will be increased glycogen stores, and each gram of glycogen is stored with about 4 grams of water. So this is also why it's really important to stay well hydrated during carb loading. Once you get running, the water will be released with the breakdown of glycogen, and you'll need less fluids during the marathon because you're already fully hydrated. By the end of the race, you should be back to your normal weight, pre-carb loading normal weight. Now, carbs for breakfast on marathon day. What should you have? Make sure that you practice your race day breakfast before a long run or two. Aim for 1 to 4 grams of carbohydrates for 1 kilogram of body weight, about 2 to 4 hours before you run. This will help to promote steady blood sugars early on in the marathon. Now, I tend to have my breakfast on race day about 3 hours before the start, and then I'll eat a banana and sip on a sports drink while heading over to the start line, finishing the sports drink about 30 minutes before I run. Some people will take a gel on the start line if they want. I try to avoid this because the amount of gels that you'll be consuming during the race, it can just get a little bit too much. So I prefer to have a sports drink before I start. There are also all sorts of other additions that can give you much smaller performance enhancements on race day. If you do want to try any of these for race day, please make sure that you've tested each one on long runs or before long runs first. These sort of things include cherry juice, beetroot shots, and caffeine. Okay, but first, get the carb loading right because that will give you far more benefits. So, to summarise, consume 7 to 12 grams of carbohydrates per 1 kilogram of body weight from Thursday to late Saturday afternoon for your Sunday marathon. Cut down on fats and some proteins so that you don't increase your overall calories by too much. Eat a normal sized carb-rich evening meal the day before your race. And practice a 1-day carb load, so about 7 to 8 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight prior to your long runs to find out what foods sit well and work for you. And have a practiced race day breakfast, 1 to 4 grams of carbs per 1 kilogram of body weight. And don't be afraid of all of this, okay? It seems like a lot and it may seem overwhelming, but it really does work. Okay, please let us know in the comments below if you currently carb load, and if so, what do you eat, okay? Good luck with all of that. Now, I do need to finish this with a big caveat, okay, that all of this information, okay, for anybody who's got diabetes or any other specific health conditions, they should speak to their doctor or consultant before adjusting their carbohydrate intake. Plus those with specific allergies or intolerances to certain types of carbohydrates, they may need to do further research to minimise possible illnesses or stomach distress. Okay, I just need to stress that. So let us know in the comments what you have. If you have anything, good luck, and I hope it all goes well on race day, and I'll be back next week talking about what to take whilst you're actually running the race. Goodbye.